Welcome, everyone. This is the Women's Veterans Empowerment Dialogues for October, and we're really excited today. We have Jane Mundale with us. Jane is a former U.S. Coast Guard Lieutenant Commander and current Senior Program Manager at Facebook, and she's going to talk to us today about some major transitions in her life, which included transitioning her gender while she was serving in the Coast Guard, and also transitioning from the Coast Guard and her military service to the workforce. So welcome, Jane. We're so excited to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure and flattering and an honor to be here for sure, definitely.
Awesome. All right. So hi, Jane. Let's start with your military service and talk about how you decided to serve in the Coast Guard. So what inspired you to serve in the Coast Guard?
Yeah, great. So I think probably similar to many veterans, I come from a very military focused family. My grandfather was in the Navy. My father was in the Air Force and the Marine Corps. And so like military service is just a very normal route for a lot of my family members. So kind of coming out of high school, like I knew I had an interest in kind of getting out there and seeing the world, doing interesting things. And at that time, my dad had actually gotten a job with the Coast Guard in Martinsburg, West Virginia, of all places. Previous to that, I had never heard of it. Having grown up in rural Pennsylvania, like the Coast Guard is just not something that was part of my universe. So anyway, I had also wanted to attend a service academy because I thought that would be a very interesting opportunity, and ended up applying to the Coast Guard Academy and was accepted. So that's kind of how I entered the Coast Guard and started on my journey. It was just a desire to follow in my family's footsteps in terms of service, and then finding this opportunity to join the U.S. Coast Guard. That was kind of my connection.
So Jane, you and I know each other because we grew up together in rural Pennsylvania. So it's like a big deal that you got accepted into the Coast Guard Academy. And I'm sure that was like a great accomplishment and your family was very proud. So let's talk about your time at the Coast Guard Academy. Warrior Scholar Project is a nonprofit focusing on service members and veterans achieving higher education. So what did you major in at the Coast Guard Academy?
Yeah, I had a bit of a wonky major. Most service academies have a focus on kind of the STEM elements that are kind of baseline requirement for most military officers. But I got a degree in government with a focus on public policy, which is also a bachelor's of science. So I did take chemistry and physics and all the kind of harder science classes and math stuff. But my specialization was more on the kind of liberal arts component of government. I did a lot of paper writing, that kind of stuff, kind of focused on government. So that was my undergraduate experience at the Coast Guard Academy, was in the government program.
At the time that you chose that major, were you thinking of your life after service and potentially exploring some government topics in a career at the time?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that I had a real solid plan in mind, honestly. It's just that particular program matched my strengths really well in terms of being a communicator and a writer. Like those were things that I like to do. And honestly, for me, I was mostly focused on my Coast Guard career after graduation. So despite your major, newly minted ensigns are kind of can go anywhere out of the academy. So I was more focused on kind of engaging with my military career versus anything related to my academics initially. But luckily, the way that the academies work is you get that really solid foundation. So even though I had my major was in government, like because of the background courses I had, my future educational opportunities were very diverse. So I ended up actually going into the IT fields in my postgraduate work, which is very different than government, doing like government IT systems and computer sciencey stuff. So I definitely appreciated having that kind of harder science, mathematics background for my undergraduate program. Yeah.
And you were able to earn your master's degree while you were serving, correct?
Yeah, that's right. I think many services do this, but it was a postgraduate program via the Coast Guard where they funded my tuition and just paid me to go to school essentially for 18 months. And I got my Master's of Science in Information Technology from Hood College in Frederick, Maryland. And then after completing my graduate program, I went to what they call a payback tour, a follow-on tour, which ironically was at the same data center where my dad worked when I joined the Coast Guard. So it was kind of a full circle experience to kind of come back into the same program that got me interested in the Coast Guard in the first place. So yeah, I was able to do my post-grad stuff with the government, which was really fun.
Yeah,
Sure.
that's a neat story of how, like, your father's Coast Guard career and yours just kept like kind of intertwining. Especially because you never, whenever you're serving in the military, you at times don't know where you're gonna be, and that's pretty cool that it kept coming back to your dad. So that's cool.
Yeah, he was just to add on that story a little bit. He was a
Lord.
civilian employee for the Coast Guard, so he wasn't in uniform when he served there. But he was actually still serving there when I came home after my postgraduate program. So I actually got to do a tour with my dad, which was a phenomenal experience, like something I really cherish. So it was really neat. Yeah.
Wow, great story. So let's talk about your transition from your military service to civilian life. I mean, for all service members, this can be a big change. It can be kind of like, you know, earth shattering in a lot of ways. So how was your transition when you decided to leave the Coast Guard?
Yeah, it was a real eye-opening and just kind of educational experience for me. Because the Coast Guard is so like all encompassing and my career was so holistic, like everything was that I thought about was just in terms of that career. So trying to translate that into the civilian world was like really intimidating, honestly. And part of that, what I found is that coming when I was looking at available career paths for me outside of the Coast Guard, I was really limiting myself in the beginning, and I thought for sure I was going to end up at some defense contracting company doing contracts because that's a similar role that I had in the Coast Guard towards when I got out. So things like tech did not even register on my radar at all. I thought for sure there's no way that that a company like Facebook or any other kind of large tech company would have any interest in someone with my background. And so it was kind of through the process of getting to know different companies, going through interviews and job fairs and some of that stuff where I started to open my eyes a little bit to the broader spectrum of places where veteran skills are actually really marketable. And there's a ton of folks who want to get their hands on newly separated veterans just because of the skills and the kind of superpowers that a lot of us bring with us from service. So yeah, I think that was my big takeaway is you have to think pretty big, or you need to be open to lots of different ideas transitioning out of the service more than maybe what you've thought of traditionally, just because it's a very different world. It's a very and there's a lot of opportunity that you may not even recognize initially. Yeah.
So let's talk about the job fairs that you just said, helped to open your eyes. How did you find those job fairs? Were they veteran specific job fairs? Were they just job fairs in general? And what did you find helpful in that experience of going to those job fairs?
For sure, yeah. So me personally, I attended the Service Academy Career Conference. It's through the Alumni Association of all the different service academies, and they have several job fairs across the country every year. And that's kind of was my primary route. There were other veteran-specific job fair kind of programs that I looked at. But I made it so far with the SAC program that I didn't really explore alternatives because it just moved so quickly for me within that sphere. But I definitely highly recommend those types of organizations to facilitate that transition from just either academics or active duty into the workforce, just because the recruiters who attend those things, they can read a military resume, they understand what an MOS is. Like there's just a lot of shortcuts that come going through a veteran tailored process for connecting you with employers that was really, really helpful for me.
Yeah, you bring up an important point that it's almost a different language, right? When you're serving and, we joke about all the acronyms. And then of course we created this series where we gave it an acronym as kind of like a joke for veteran lingo, right? WVEDs for Women Veterans Empowerment Dialogues. So like before you had those job fairs, did you find that difficult trying to take your Coast Guard, your military language and like match it up to the language in a job description?
Yeah, it was intimidating for sure, and it's just difficult to know how to talk about it. If you're interested in the sphere of government military stuff, then it's not so bad, right? Like if you're a defense contractor, you know how to do that stuff too. So like it just depends on how far you want to go from your kind of your safe place, right? So but it was difficult. Like most of us don't in the military, we don't have to write resumes very often. So things like attending your TAPS course and kind of taking advantage of those government provided resources to help you get familiar with those processes can definitely be helpful. So I went through TAPS, like that was really helpful just to get a sense of what that marketability thing is, how to write a resume, just some of those basics. Like it's definitely a good opportunity to review that stuff before you make your transition, just because it's not always straightforward.
Right. So did you start to consider tech as a result of attending these job fairs? Is that what kind of opened up tech to you? And how did you get connected with Facebook and realize that might be a good place for you to start your civilian career?
Yeah, so Facebook was not on my radar at all. I attended a SAC conference in San Diego, and Facebook actually requested to speak to me. One of the managers had seen my resume and a heap of other attendees and had picked out the fact that I had some data center experience from my time in West Virginia, and that I had an IT background. And then turns out that manager who noticed my resume was also an Army veteran. He was a former enlisted. I think he got out as an E6. But I think that just he was able to see my resume through that kind of veteran lens, and that helped him kind of understand who I was just as a potential candidate. And those initial conversations made me really interested in Facebook as a company. Like it really opened my eyes to the fact that I wasn't thinking big enough in terms of the different opportunities. And from there, it kind of went very quickly from an exploratory, just initial conversation to a real job opportunity, which I jumped on. So that's kind of how I ended up at Facebook, was just through those conversations and that engagement.
That's amazing. So you were contacted by an Army E6 enlisted, which is really cool because I think one of the things that our enlisted vets that we serve at Warrior Scholar Project do a lot is they have imposter syndrome and they have trouble picturing themselves not only at great top schools for their bachelor's degrees, but also then potentially at a company like Facebook, that everybody knows it's, sort of this like big, awesome, like, place that you wouldn't potentially picture yourself there. So did you have a hard time once Facebook contacted you? Did you have a hard time like picturing yourself at Facebook at first, or did it seem like just a natural fit once you were talking to another veteran involved with Facebook?
It was surprising for me at first, but once I realized how thick veterans are in that organization at Facebook, like I kind of recognized that, hey, like maybe there is a home, a nice place for me to go here, because I'm obviously not the first veteran to join that program. So once I kind of recognized the parallels, then it became a lot more comfortable. I think you're absolutely on the imposter syndrome front. I think that is so spot on. And I think that what it means to be enlisted in the service has changed so much in the past, 20, 30 years. Like the idea that junior enlisted are uneducated, that is a misnomer. Like that is not often the case. A lot of times they are very highly educated, and in terms of the skills that companies are looking for, if you have the ability to kind of form a team, guide people, show leadership, and execute on a plan, like those types of behaviors happen at all levels of the chain of command. So like that's really the sweet spot, and that's the stuff that I feel a lot of companies are looking for from veterans. And you'll see that just as much in your junior enlisted as you will in your senior officer corps. It's not exclusive to one or the other. So in terms of the marketability and the fit for enlisted veterans in even highly technical and skill level jobs, like I definitely have seen enlisted folks be very successful in that space. Absolutely.
It's amazing. So in terms of your transition, another thing that comes up a lot, especially for women veterans a lot of times, is do you identify as a veteran now that you've transitioned to the civilian world? And was that a hard identity for you to kind of embrace at all?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. In my professional life, absolutely. And I think a lot of that is because I work closely with a lot of other veterans, and all my stupid jokes, like, they're ubiquitous. Like everybody knows what, when you're telling a sea story, like, a lot of the people I work with, they know what that means. And, if I call a staircase a ladder well or something, like, just the silly things, like, just having that recognition. Honestly, it's a good way to do some team building across different parts of the organization. If I can find out who's served in a group, like that's something that I can instantly connect with. So professionally, I would say that yes, I do identify as a veteran, and that's a very comfortable kind of role for me to occupy. In my civilian kind of just at home life, I less so. I think that just culturally, there's this image of a veteran, and it's usually an older guy with a ball cap on with like stuff on it, right, or like pins or something, and that's what everybody thinks of when they think of a veteran, not someone who looks like me. So it has been more awkward in my personal life to kind of self-identify and like kind of be seen as a veteran, just because they don't necessarily fit that particular mold. So yeah, it's a little bit different, I'd say, in my personal life, but professionally, it's been a huge advantage, honestly, because other veterans know how to get me too, because they know that that's where I'm coming from. So I think that it's definitely paid off for me to stay connected to the vet community, and to kind of keep those things alive in my career, for sure.
Yeah, I think it's something that many, especially women veterans, struggle with, is exactly what you said. In some scenarios, it's easier to identify as a veteran, especially if you're part of an organization with other veterans. But then in your personal life, how do you integrate into the civilian society, and retain those identities? So it's just a really interesting part of the transition that I think sometimes gets overlooked. So another thing that we're wondering is, so as a trans woman, is there something about that identity that has impacted the way you interact in veteran spaces? I mean, it's a very underrepresented group of veterans, of women veterans specifically. So has that affected the way you're identifying as a veteran at all?
I wouldn't say it's affected the way I identify as a veteran, but it's definitely opened my eyes to a lot of the struggles that a lot of veterans face, but the trans community specifically, kind of has an overexposure to, specific to like VA healthcare stuff, like navigating that whole universe. Like that is a huge challenge for anyone. But a lot of my, friends and colleagues and folks I got to know, who are also trans, navigating that space as a trans veteran can be just that much more challenging. And the thing I found kind of the most surprising and honestly the most refreshing through my transition out of active duty into the workforce is nobody really cares in the workforce about my status as whatever. Like it's become such a routine thing for most large organizations that it's kind of a non-issue, which is refreshing. And I hope that, the military, over time can reach a point where it is just, not a big deal and not something that requires special attention. So that's kind of the dream, I guess. So like in my experience since leaving the military, it doesn't come up very often, and it's not something that I have to wrestle with in the same way as I did when I was in uniform.
That is great to hear. I know that you're a big proponent of just normalizing this experience that you've had, because as you've mentioned, it's going to be more ubiquitous as more people, come forward and share their stories. You were very open about your own story with transition. Not many transgender veterans were featured publicly in the Washington Post, but you were. And you chose to do this fairly early in your experience with your transition. So can you talk about why you decided to take your story public?
Yeah, sure. I agree with you. Like part of in that moment in time, and given all the things that were happening, and maybe I'll set a little context so that makes a little bit more sense. Open service by trans members wasn't announced until sometime in 2015, I believe, maybe early 2016. And there was a window between administrations where the open service was announced, and then there was an announcement from the next administration indicating that they were not going to be pursuing that particular policy choice from the previous administration. So a lot of us were kind of caught off guard, right? The door had been opened, and some of us had stepped through the threshold, and then it felt like it was getting close behind us. And given the fact that one, I was very proximate to these issues, I was very informed at that time on everything that was going on because I was going through it myself. And the fact that I'm an officer, or I was at the time, and I was aware of many folks who were not in a position to have a voice at that moment. Those are the things that kind of compelled me to speak out. And it was risky, like
Yes.
not that I felt like I was unsafe or anything, but just from a career perspective or from a chain of command perspective, going to the press is a very high risk choice as a serving member of the armed forces. So I
just in general, minus
yeah.
the rest of it. Yeah.
But I felt really passionate about speaking up because what was happening, I didn't feel like it was right, and it was going to have a lot of negative consequences on some very vulnerable people. So that was a lot of the rationale behind why I was so open about my transition and my status and my feelings about a lot of these things. Is they were just very close to me personally, and more importantly, they were going to have potentially negative impacts on folks who couldn't speak up. So I felt like it was something I could help with.
And we're so glad that you did and that you were able to feel confident in speaking up and sharing your story, because I'm sure that your story has helped a lot of other people in similar situations. So I'm wondering, how did your life in your military service change as a result of your transition, or did it change at all?
Yeah, I was extraordinarily fortunate to have a lot of things go my way as part of my transition that I didn't deserve or earn. It just happened to work out that way, which made things a lot easier for me. So I think most importantly, my family and immediate relationships with the people, my support network, I didn't lose anyone close to me as a result of my transition, which unfortunately is a really common occurrence for a lot of people, whether that be parents or a spouse or other kind of key members of the team, right, who you need to kind of just get through day to day. I was really fortunate that everyone in my sphere was accepting and supportive and was there to help versus, being rejected or being subject to that thing. So I think in that regard, which feels unique because most people I talk to, that's not the case, really helped me out. The other kind of curse and blessing in my transition is I was serving as a commanding officer on a ship when this came to pass for me, when I realized that I had to make a transition. And it was before any of the policy had been written. So on the one hand, I was afforded a level of insulation in my personal life just from being in command. Like, I don't have to get grilled by anybody else and answer a bunch of questions all the time when you're the boss, right? So I had a certain level of protection, but at the same time, I also had a deep sense of obligation that no matter what was happening in my personal life, that could not translate into any kind of negative impact for my crew and for the mission that we were there to do. Because that, and most veterans share this feeling, like the mission is the most important thing. Like, it's not about an individual, it's about, what can we do to get the job done. So yeah, as part of that process, I transferred from my operational job into a more staff support role, while I completed a lot of the medical stuff I had to do, and while we kind of worked out all the kinks. Like, I wanted to do that in a space where I wasn't potentially negative impacting the operational aspects of my role. So that was good. So I'm glad that I was able to do that. In terms of overall career impacts or anything, I think I had departed before, I really got a good sense of what those may have been. But my sense is that it would not have seriously impacted my career in a negative way. I feel like because I was transparent and because I relied on the core values of the Coast Guard to guide my decision making, like, as long as you're doing those things, like, you're probably going to be okay. So, like, that's kind of how I proceeded, just cautiously, slowly, very openly, and with just being as honorable and respectful as I possibly could through that whole process. Like, by the end, I didn't feel like I had any kind of permanent damage to my career or anything like that.
That's great. Although it does sound like potentially there was a lot of pressure on you while you were having to make all of these decisions. So it's, it sounds like you were very fortunate to be able to switch your roles. Was that something that you feel happened as a result of you being so transparent and vocal about, what you were hoping to sort of do in that scenario?
Yeah, no, I had pretty good folks I was working with in my operational chain of command. We were kind of all figuring this out together at the same time, so it wasn't super clear. But no, that was another huge benefit that I was able to kind of take advantage of. I know other folks who transitioned in place at their unit who were not in charge, right? So, like, moving roles, that's not a requirement. Like, that's just something that worked out for me. And a lot of folks are able to successfully transition in their role. Like, it's not like a that big of an impactful deal. For me personally, like, because of the medical reasons and the fact that the policy wasn't quite there yet, like, I felt like my skills would be better used elsewhere, kind of helping the Coast Guard in some aspects, kind of figuring this stuff out too. So Coast Guard headquarters felt like a much better place for me during that time. So that's kind of what led to my transfer during that process. But that's definitely not a requirement. That's not something that most people do. That was just something that ended up working out for me.
It's great that you were able to figure out something that worked out for you specifically. I know you've been very open about the fact that your transition in particular was potentially easier than some other folks transitioning because of your level of privilege and your access to resources. Can you kind of elaborate on how that may have been different than what other folks have experienced?
Yeah, so even as an 03, 04 at the time, I was just getting ready to make 04. I had a lot of really great mentors and connections organizationally throughout the Coast Guard of folks who knew the policy or had, like, connections to some decision makers. So I was able to get a lot of information as part of this process, where I think, if I'd been in an enlisted role that wasn't connected to these things, or in a different part of the Coast Guard, then maybe I wouldn't have had access to the information. The other thing too is I was in command, and it was my second command as a JO. So like, it just in terms of my resume with the Coast Guard, like I was a pretty high performer in terms of the junior officer. So a lot of people took what I had to say seriously, right? I think there's this. I think one of the most negative and nasty and kind of stereotypes for people transitioning their gender is that they're doing it just to get attention, or like, they're just trying to be special for special treatment. And like, I think I avoided a lot of that just because I was a very serious person going into this process. Like, I had a resume to back up, what I was saying, and I'd already been, demonstrated my commitment to the organization, and like people knew I was, I wasn't just a frivolous kind of attention seeker. Like I was, I knew what I was doing, and I had some credibility. So those things definitely helped me as well. And then lastly, I think just being an officer, it affords itself a certain amount of insulation from like, getting picked on necessarily, or like, people really, behaving inappropriately. And I think for me personally, like I think that helped a lot too. I wasn't exposed to kind of, the buoy deck, or whatever, the squad bay, kind of razzing that a lot of people have to, endure through their military service anyway. Not to say that hazing or anything is exclusive to non-officer roles, but in my particular situation, it wasn't something that I was worried about. So I think those things helped me a lot.
Do you think your experience would have been different if you had been enlisted as opposed to an officer?
I do, mostly just because I doubt I would have had the ability to see the roadmap for how to chart my course through the organization. Just as an officer, I think I was at the policy level, and just in terms of how those kinds of decisions get made, and like, how the sausage is getting made in the back room. Like I had some insights into that, that I don't know that I would have had as a, in a more operational context, or if I had been an enlisted person. So that's not to say I wouldn't have gotten taken care of and I wouldn't have been successful, or like that things would have gone badly for me. It just would have been a very different experience, I think, without, if I was in that different level of the organization.
So did you notice during your transition, because you were an officer when you were transitioning and you were serving at the time, did your transition in any way impact how you saw yourself as a leader, or how do you think it affected how other people saw you as a leader, either positively or negatively?
Yeah, I don't want to over pivot here or make it sound too crazy, but there's a certain amount of self-confidence that's required to have a successful transition, because if you can't take yourself seriously, how do you expect anyone else to? Which require, you gotta go in, you gotta go for it, right? If you want it to work. And I just remember the first couple times, like going to work or going to a professional setting where I was presenting authentically versus, how everyone had always seen me. Like those were very challenging experiences. But thankfully, one of the good and bad things about transitioning in the service, at least in the Coast Guard, is everyone I serve with has this foundation of the core values that underpins everything we do. So, having high integrity, being respectful of everyone, and being dedicated to the mission, that's the stuff we all have in common. So, when, no matter what problem you're dealing with, if you have that as your foundation, like people operating in good faith, we can get through anything, right? So even though the military is slow and it's, ham-handed sometimes, and it's inherently conservative and has its issues, like I think the fact that it's grounded in those core values made my transition a lot less problematic, because I could expect good faith from most of the people I was dealing with, which was super helpful.
Awesome. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how best to support someone going through their transition, veteran or non-veteran. I mean, if you have examples of that are specific to veteran communities, what could others around you do, or what did others around you do as you were transitioning that made you feel supported? And is there anything that didn't happen that you think could have helped?
Yeah, I think in general, this relates a lot to what I was just saying. I think that when we're dealing with any issue, especially if it's a personal issue with one of our shipmates or someone around us, like just making sure we're grounded in that kind of concept of respect and integrity, and kind of assuming that whoever's speaking to you, that they're telling you the truth, right? And that they deserve to be believed, at least initially, until you can get through it, right? And everyone I spoke with and throughout my transition, and every interaction I had with members of the Coast Guard and elsewhere, like as long as people were operating in good faith and just being respectful and kind, and just like open about either their ignorance or their knowledge, like as long as you're being cool about it, like it was fine with me. I didn't have many, if any, like negative experiences with individuals throughout my transition in the military either. So I think maybe that's another area where I was lucky. Like there was never a moment where I was like attacked or torn down by somebody else, which was good as well. But in terms of being supportive, I think just being willing to listen when someone is trying to tell you something, and asking how people are doing and actually caring about those answers, and then just being respectful of how much someone wants to talk about an issue like that, right? Being trans is unique because everybody sees this life-changing process you're going through because it's physically happening before their eyes, and then you're asking them to treat you differently, right? So it's a very kind of open process. Lots of people I talked to during my transition were also dealing with like major struggles or big issues in their lives. They just weren't as obvious, right? So that was one of my takeaways, is like just treating everybody with the same level of respect and openness and kindness, and kind of I think that's a good strategy no matter what, because you just never know what folks are dealing with, whether they're trans or not or whatever. Like I think just kind of encouraging that type of open honesty and kindness between individuals is the best advice I could give.
Especially in the veteran community, there's this image that showing any sort of weakness or saying you're struggling with something is kind of taboo, right? So having your transition be so, like you said, visually and like physically it was happening, was that, do you think that helped you be more open about it, or do you think that can help others be more open about it rather than trying to like muscle through as like a one-man person, like a one-man machine or one-woman machine?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. I think for me, like the openness of it wasn't a choice. It was like, I'm changing my grooming standards. I'm gonna be wearing a different uniform, and my name is going to be different, starting on X, Y, and Z date, right? Like there's no way to hide that. So like, we're all going to deal with this whether we want to or not. Like that's kind of what I guess my point around that stuff is. In one way, it did help because it's a very sharp threshold, and you have to be extra committed and sure that you want to do this before you cross that line, because it's not like you can easily just turn around and come back, right? So in terms of helping make sure that it was the right decision for me, and make sure that I was thinking clearly and had my my plan worked out appropriately, like it was helpful in that regard. Yeah, but relying on your support and reaching out and talking to other folks who have similar experiences, and just sharing was an enormously helpful component for me. That was another piece of in the back of my head, the rationale for my transfer during my transition is I was able to then tap into a lot of other trans veterans who were going through the same process at the same time as I was, and just benefiting from their lessons learned and tips and tricks. Like it's not something I think I could have done by myself by any stretch of the imagination. Like having that robust support network was 100% requirement for me, and I think for anybody who understands so complicated. Yeah.
Yeah, we are big proponents of maintaining that sense of community, post-transition in general, post-military transition. So I think that you're spot on saying, support is key, right? So I'm going to ask a question about, do you have any advice about living your authentic self that you would give to others? Because in your story, you've shared how basically you came to a point where you realized you weren't being your authentic self. And how did you kind of figure that out? And what advice do you have for other people to kind of come to terms with figuring out who they are authentically and then moving forward as their authentic self?
Yeah, no, great question. For me, I had compartmentalized those aspects of my life so effectively through my life that I wasn't even aware I was trans at all. Like that was just not something I had on my radar whatsoever. And so when it kind of reared up for me, I was in my early 30s, halfway through this military career. For me personally, it presented itself to me in a way where I knew I had to deal with this immediately or as quickly as possible, just to get through it, because I wasn't going to be able to continue to hide it or not deal with it effectively. That's a unique experience to me. I think everybody's experience with this stuff is very unique. There are people who are able to kind of manage things until the timing is better, but for me, that just wasn't an option. But yeah, I think getting connected to folks who are knowledgeable and know how to support folks through this type of process was really helpful for me. So I had some excellent therapy support, both internal from the military as well as external support, just to help work through the process. Making sure you have a good support network at home and people you can talk to and just kind of bounce ideas off of. Because transition can be it's inherently a very self-centered process because you're talking about yourself. It's important to have people who can kind of lovingly push back against against you if you're being too selfish, right? So like it's possible to get too wrapped up in your own experience to see the forest through the trees. So having folks in your sphere who can kind of provide that legitimate feedback is really important as well. And then just taking advantage and exploring all the different support options, like it's definitely a team effort to do it successfully, which sounds so crazy, but for me, it really was. Like I definitely wouldn't have made much progress at all without having recruited a lot of support from a lot of different aspects.
One final kind of silly question before we take questions from the audience. Do you have any advice that you would give your 17-year-old self? And I'm very curious about this myself because I knew you when you were 17 and you knew me when I was 17. So what would you tell your 17-year-old self?
Yeah, no, it's really especially as it relates to transition and some of these topics, it's a really fascinating question. Because there's advantages and disadvantages to when things happen, right? So a lot of folks do choose to transition much earlier in life, and that has certain implications. Some folks wait till later. I don't have a good answer in terms of advice for myself on that question. I think things played out the way they did, and that just has to be the way it was. So I think though I would tell myself at a younger age that. I grew up thinking that I had to strive to become this great person or strive to become something that greater than myself, and I had to build it. And I think what I've realized now that I'm older is that that's not necessarily the case. Like all of us are worthy and awesome people, right? You can just be yourself and be valued for that. You don't have to become something else. And I would have I would have liked to think I could tell myself that at 17, but I don't think I would have listened. So I think that's just something you learn as you go anyway. So
I think that is amazing advice. I don't know that any 17-year-olds would, take the advice from their future selves, but that's as good as I think, you could get to tell a 17-year-old. All right, so we have one question from Stephen, and Stephen would like to know, have you noted that veterans, especially E6 and below, get pigeonholed into specific positions based on past pay grades versus their capability by either past senior enlisted or former officers? Is this something you've noticed?
100%, that's a real thing. And it's a real shame because I think people miss huge opportunities to recruit excellent people because they're not thinking broadly enough. So just another personal data point, I have a younger sister who just got out of the Coast Guard as well. She had a bachelor's degree, super high-powered, high performer. She went the enlisted route. She was a non-rate on a couple of ships, an E3, I think she got out as an E5. So to discount her level of expertise and education and her capability just because she occupied a lower level of the organization would be such a disaster for everybody. So I see it through personal eyes as well as just kind of more broadly, but I definitely see that happening frequently. And it's a shame. I think it's something that we all need to work on helping people get past. Because the old days of the image of goober pile or something like that as being the junior enlisted person, that's just not the case anymore. Our junior enlisted are highly educated, super sharp, have lots of great operational experience. They're often the ones actually doing stuff in the military versus planning or drinking coffee, which that's kind of my joke about being an officer. But yeah, no, I totally see that as a real thing and something that as a community, I think we could do a lot better to address and to kind of dispel that myth for sure.
Do you have a happy ending on your sister's scenario? Did she overcome this immense challenge, or is she still struggling with it?
Yeah, no, I don't even know that she's experienced that same level. I wasn't implying that she's been discounted because of her experience, but someone could, right? Right. Because a lot of people have that stuff in their head. So I think when you've seen it personally, or if you happen to be one of those people, you can recognize how foolish that whole paradigm is. But for folks who've grown up in that world, right, and it's a cultural thing, just that in society at large, that junior enlisted are not highly technical leadership, whatever, insert your adjective there, and it's just not true. That's a myth that we need to put to bed.
Yeah. So we have a question from James, who said, do you have any advice on balancing between personal interests and experience from the service? How much weight would you recommend to put on each? And I mean, I know you have a lot going on outside of your job at Facebook too. You have a lot of interests that you participate in. So do you have any advice for James on that?
Yeah, it really depends on the type of role or opportunity you're exploring, like how to translate your military experience. But for me, what I found most compelling when I talk to other veterans, either in an interview setting or about different types of roles, is what were the aspects of your service that you engaged with most heavily? What did you take away from those experiences? And for me, when I did my interview process through my transition process, I had 6 C stories that I knew front to back, left to right. And you could ask me any question in the universe and I could tell you one of my C stories and pivot it to answer the question that you're asking. But I think, rooting your experience to those key stories and those key scenarios that really demonstrate the stuff that you were into in your service, that can be a very powerful tool no matter what you're doing. So finding a way to comfortably speak about your military service, whether that includes, the technical aspects or whether it's more related to your outside interests and how that funneled through your military service, just getting those stories for yourself locked down. I think that would be my generic response to that question.
All right, so Cassie has a question. You talked a lot about the importance of having a team during your experience while transitioning. What advice would you give to folks who don't have a team? How could they recruit others for support?
Yeah, there's organizations that exist now that are super helpful. I am not an expert in this field, so I can't tell you the best one to reach out to, but there are networks that are seeking to support folks in transition. And you can do it where you control how much information you're sharing, and just having the ability to even anonymously just discuss some of these issues. The internet, Facebook are wonderful places for this type of thing, like looking for those kind of avenues to even just have candid discussions with folks. If you don't have a support network in place, like just having someone to talk to really is a huge element to being able to move through this stuff. And if it's not in your chain of command, if you're in uniform or if you're in the service and you're not receiving that benefit from your chain of command, like treat it like you would any other issue, right? Like there's usually a command master chief or senior enlisted person whose role is to help facilitate members, getting access to the resources they need. Like, you could talk to your commanding officer, whatever it may look like, given your comfort level. But I would highly encourage folks to look for opportunities to expand their support network through this process, just because it definitely yields better results, in my opinion.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Jane, for being with us today. We're going to have Camilla come on and talk to us about some fall courses and close this out. So Camilla, take it away.
Hey, Jane, thank you so much. We so appreciate you coming and talking with us today. And I just feel like you're a wealth of knowledge that we might need to have you come back for another WVED on another topic. It's lovely to have you here. So thank you so much.
Thanks. Honored to be here. Thanks.
Yeah. So I just wanted to let everyone know that we do have some fall courses coming up. Our boot camps are coming up. We've got one coming up on October 31st through November 5th. That's a humanities cohort. And then we have two cohorts in December. We have a December 12th through December 17th humanities and a December 12th through December 17th STEM. And we still have spots in all of those courses. So if that's something you're interested in, please feel free to reach it back out to us. You should all have my email address, but we will make sure and send that out to anybody who has attended, so that we can get you registered if you want. These WVEDs are intended to just kind of create community and connect people with similar interests or similar needs or similar experiences. So we have a Facebook group that you can join if you have not done that already, and just connect with other people. If Jane feels comfortable, we will share her information as much as she wants to get you all connected if anybody needs anything from her or wants to ask any follow-up questions. As always, we are here and we are willing and able to be supportive through your transition into higher education, but also just to support you as women veterans. So if anybody thinks of anything that you're like, WSB really should be doing this, please reach out to us because we would love to talk about that. Also, if you have any topics that you think would be really interesting to talk about on a WVED, or if you think that we have a different forum that we should be using, let's talk. So please reach out. We really appreciate you all being here today. This has been really wonderful, and I hope you all got something out of it like I did.
Yes. Thank you all. We're going to stop the recording now.